Tonight we're going to start a new series, and this series is based on the book of Job. Even though the book of Job is the oldest book in the Bible, it's still extremely relevant for us today. In fact, it's always going to be relevant as long as there's suffering in this world. This book tackles one of life's toughest subjects. Why does a loving God allow good people to suffer? There's a saying that you may have heard that there are only two things that are certain in life: death and taxes. But I'm going to submit to you that there are actually three: death, taxes, and suffering. Sooner or later, life is going to take a turn for the worse, and it's going to shatter your world, and it's going to shake your faith. And I'm going to tell you, you've got to be ready. And that's why I want to spend the next weeks in the book of Job. This book records the suffering of a very good man and how it stretched his faith. And I believe it contains some important lessons about life that we need to hear and we need to understand. This series is called When Life Takes a Turn for the Worse. And the best way that I can start this whole thing is by asking this question: are good people exempt from suffering? And the answer is obvious. And the answer is no. Good people are not exempt from suffering. And I ask the question because we tend to forget that knowing and following Jesus doesn't exclude us from the troubles and trials of life, no matter what some of these new teachings will tell you. God is in control, right? Of course. He blesses those who trust and obey, correct? Absolutely. Therefore, nothing bad will happen to me if I trust and obey God, right? Wrong. Let's think about a good man whose life took a turn for the worse. He lived several thousand years ago, and his record, as I said, is found in the oldest book of the Bible, the book of Job. And the first two chapters reveal three facts about the life of Job. First, we're going to look at the devotion that Job had. Chapter 1 starts by telling us that he was devoted to God. In Job 1, chapter 1, verse 1, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Verse 1 tells us that he was blameless, meaning he was well balanced. He had a good relationship with God. That his neighbors and his family, he also had good relations with. He was upright, meaning that he treated others right. That he feared God, that he treated God with respect, and that he shunned evil. He consistently avoided those things that were wrong. And that is a good example for us to follow. Our lives have to be characterized by the same qualities. So Job was devoted to God, but he was also devoted to his family. Look with me beginning in verse 3. And there was born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she-asses and a very great household. So that this man was the greatest of all the men of the east. And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And thus did Job continually. Verse 2 tells us that Job had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Verse 3 tells us that he was more than able to care for and support his family. And verse 4 and 5 tells us that he was even concerned about their relationship with God. He made sure that they were right with God. This is a very good example for us to follow, friends. God helps us to treat our family the way Job treated his. He was devoted to God. He was devoted to his family. And wouldn't you like to have him for a friend, or better yet, a family member? Wouldn't it be great if he was a member of our church and you had him for a Sunday school teacher? He had his life together. He was walking the straight and narrow, and he's setting a good example. And if anybody should be exempt from suffering, it should be Job. But as is usually the case, that wasn't the case. Chapter 1 reveals the devotion that Job had, but then it describes the disasters that Job experienced. Verse 6 takes us to heaven, where God is meeting with a group of angels. And guess who's with them? Satan himself. And beginning in verse 6, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast thou not made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. So disaster is right around the corner. It is going to strike, and Job is going to lose his finances, and he's going to lose his children. Look with me at verses 13 through 19. And there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, The oxen were plowing, and the asses feeding beside them. And the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I am only escaped alone to tell thee. And while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, The fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was speaking, there came also another, and said, The Chaldeans made out 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and have carried them away. Yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was speaking, there came also another, and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I am escaped alone to tell thee. Boy, if that wouldn't ruin your day, I don't know what would. But let's look at how Job responds to this, beginning in verse 20. Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground, and get this, and worshipped, and said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. All I can say is, wow. So far, he's taken a lot better than I would. But as the old saying goes, when it rains, it pours. And that's what Job is experiencing here. In chapter 2, the devil invited himself to another meeting in heaven. Look at beginning in verse 1. And there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. And then look what verse 7 says. Verse 7, So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. So disaster strikes a third time. And now Job loses his health. He's lost his family. He's lost his livestock. He's lost his home. And now he loses his health. But look at verse 8. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and sat down among the ashes. In verse 8, his wife is so upset and angry that she wishes that he would just go ahead and die. And now picture Job in your mind. As I said, he's lost his finances, his children, his health, and his marriage now. He's grieving over the death of his kids, and his body's covered in painful sores. Pretty sad picture, isn't it? Now I wonder, can you relate maybe just a little bit to what Job's going through? Some of you know what it's like to lose your finances and not be able to support your family. Some of you know what it's like to suddenly lose a loved one. Some of you know what it's like to lose your health. And some of you know what it's like to lose your marriage. Most of you can relate just maybe a little bit to Job. And the rest of you, if you can't relate now, you will be able to down the road. Because nobody is exempt from the trials and troubles and tribulations of this life. It's a very difficult matter to understand when God permits affliction or loss to come into our lives. Our humanity wants to cry out, Why me, God? I love you and faithfully serve you. Why did you permit this sorrow to happen to me? One reason for affliction is to make us into instruments. Instruments which will be greater use to God. Let me give you an example. A lump of iron is violently ripped from its comfortable place in the earth. It's shipped to a faraway place. It's exposed to melting heat. It's poured into a mold. It's squeezed by rollers, smashed and pounded by a forge, subjected to electrical shock to bond other metals to it, and then later scraped against grindstones to give it a final shape. And the resulting screwdriver or another exquisite piece of tableware could never have existed except for the difficult experiences that it endured along the way. Everybody hurts and grieves and suffers at some point in their lives. And in the midst of that hurt, there's a decision you have to make, which brings us to the third fact tonight. And that is the decision that Job faced. I want you to look with me at verses 9 through 11 of verse 1 and 4 and 5 of verse 2, or chapter 2. Beginning in verse 9, Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast thou not made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Hast thou blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land? But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And then in verses 4 and 5 of chapter 2, and Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. So basically what Satan is saying here is the only reason he's devoted to you is because you've been good to him. Stop blessing him. Let him suffer. And when you do, he will curse you. See, that's the decision Job faced. And that is the decision you and I face every time life takes a turn for the worse. Do I curse God or do I bless God? Do I doubt God or do I trust God? Do I walk by sight or do I walk by faith? And that is the decision we face when life takes a turn for the worse. So let's look at what Job did. In verses 20 through 22 of chapter 1, then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. And then when his health was affected, look at what he said in verse 10, chapter 2. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. In other words, friends, Job trusted God. And that's what we need to do. Whenever life takes a turn for the worse, we need to trust God. Why should I trust God whenever life takes a turn for the worse? I'll tell you, because it's the right thing to do. After all, God is in total control. He knows how to run this universe, and He deserves our trust. It's the right thing to do, and not only that, it is the best thing to do. God will take care of you through thick and thin, if and only if you trust Him. Pretty easy decision, wouldn't you say? Not all the time, though, and especially when circumstances lie and tell you, no, God let you down. He doesn't care. He won't help you. See, deciding to trust God when life takes a turn for the worse may not be an easy decision, but it's the right decision. And it is by far the best decision. So what about you? I hope and pray that God has used this message to speak to your heart tonight. And I hope that this will help you trust God whenever life takes a turn for the worse. Next week, we are going to continue this. But for tonight, we're going to stop here and then pick it up next week. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, life throws so many obstacles at us. Satan throws so many obstacles at us. And we just pray, God, that you would give us the strength to stand up when the tempter's before us and hold firm to your promise that you will never leave us or forsake us, that you are here with us always. God, I just pray if there's anyone out there that's having a difficult time right now, that is suffering in any way, that they can take comfort in knowing that they are being refined by the refiner's fire, and that they will come out a better person than they ever thought they could be. I just pray you'd be with us throughout this week. Love us and protect us. And all these things we ask in your name.